Do you want to unmute, make sure your microphones are green? The time is 6 o'clock.
Okay, thank you. Call this meeting to order and we'll start with a roll call.
And just before we do the roll call, I just had a quick little housekeeping announcement. Some of our remote participants are struggling to identify who is speaking. So we've had a request, if you could identify yourself before making comments, it will be helpful to them. I've also added an additional camera to assist. So I have a camera at that angle and I've added a camera pointing directly at the directors.
Thank you.
Director Danziger,
Here.
Director Hassler,
Here.
Director Jorgen,
Here.
Director Romer,
Here.
President Jex.
Here. You want to join us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Okay, we'll open for public comment on any item in the closed session.
And so we do not have any attendees and we have not received any written public comment.
Okay, we'll move then into the closed session.
And the time is 6:02.
Good evening.
Next item.
The last item. Waive the reading. Ordinance?
No, it's the purchasing.
Yes, I got that
Yeah.
copy of,
I mean, I thought about whether we should maybe try to take it out of that order. Because you don't have to call for 2 hours, but we're not gonna have to pay it. for 2 hours, So it's he's off the phone.
Is everyone
okay, so
testing?
would you like to do that?
If you guys wouldn't mind.
Oh, that's fine. I don't think there's any magic.
That way we can get them off. Yeah.
You don't want the fan on?
That would be great.
It's just way backwards. Yeah. It looks like it's on high, it's on lowest. Might lose some papers if I turn it on turbo. Y'all go with that?
So I think we're gonna take first to get out of the way.
9.6.
Oh, sure, absolutely.
But cool.
Okay. Great. Fine.
And so the time is 7:06. I know. So all microphones should be unmuted. Green light should be on.
Okay, it's like to call the meeting to order. And the roll call.
Director Danziger,
Here.
Director Hassler.
Here.
Director Jorgens.
Here.
Director Romer.
Here.
President Jex.
Here. Like to just report that there's nothing to disclose during the closed session, the general meeting. And would, excuse me, would like to invite any public comment on items not on the agenda.
So we have one in-person public comment. Sandy Pearson.
Yes, I'm Sandy Pearson. I live on Minor Road. I brought this map in to show you today. There's a parcel map from my neighborhood. These are parcels of 2, 3, 5 acres. And the colors show the difference from the width of the fuel break. The old ordinance was a 30-foot fuel break, and that's the dark red line. And then it went to a 100-foot fuel break. And you can see that it takes up a good part of the parcel. In fact, if you measure it out, just fuel breaks now on a 5-acre parcel takes 70% of the area. So basically, me, the landowner who's paying property taxes on this, I don't have a say on what happens on 70% of my 5-acre parcel. So I should point out that this map is a little bit misleading because this is if it's vacant parcels. If there was a house in the middle of this yellow area, then it too would have a 100-foot fuel break all the way around. And pretty much the entire 5-acre parcel would then have to be treated as a fuel break. So this is why I'm concerned about the width. And I want to know for sure, what did we gain by making the fuel breaks so much wider, particularly because it makes 200 feet when both neighbors have to do this, which is wider than a lot of our shaded fuel breaks that we're working on now. So this is my concern. I'm going to pass this around. Sorry, I didn't make copies. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you very much for your comment. Thank you.
Ms. Pearson, if I could just ask a quick question.
Are you aware that there's a system for obtaining modifications in such circumstances such as yours?
Yes, I am, but my understanding is the modification is for 1 year only.
I don't know that to be true. Chief, can you?
All right, thank you. Modifications are not for 1 year only. There's nothing that would prevent a modification from being approved in the long term, and there's nothing that would prevent a modification. We regularly accept where parcels where a fire plan has been prepared. We regularly accept a modification in lieu of the fuel break.
But could that modification be withdrawn at some future date?
Do you mind speaking into the microphone?
Can the modification be withdrawn at the future date, or is it kind of in perpetuity?
I'm not aware of any circumstance where we've withdrawn a modification, but they're not in perpetuity because obviously conditions change. Our understanding of fire behavior has improved significantly, and we see fire regulations in response to the changing conditions and in response to the increasing number of community-wide fire loss. We see fire regulations becoming more restrictive over time. So as regulations change, it would certainly be reasonable to revisit fire plans to determine that they were in fact meeting the best science and the best understanding of how to prevent urban conflagration, where we transition into structure-to-structure fire spread, as we recently saw Hawaii and seen in our area at the Camp Fire in 2018 and the Santa Rosa fires in the North Bay in 2017.
No argument there. The question is how wide of a, how much of a burden can you put on small acreage parcels before you're taking all the usable ground?
I would just like to point out, though, that taking all the usable ground, I don't think is an accurate description of one, how a fuel break can be constructed, to the natural environment of what an environment that is in an ecosystem that's in equilibrium, what it would look like, and three, with modifications where the construction of fuel breaks is not practical, what alternate means and measures could be approved, could be submitted and approved in order to restore the landscape to the natural environment. But I would remind anyone who's paying attention that the condition of our landscape today is not a natural environment that's in equilibrium. I would call anyone's attention who's interested to the pictures posted just outside the Sarge Little Hale room, showing what the Orinda Hills looked like in the 30s, 40s, 50s. And there's a striking departure from what it looks like today, particularly with the prevalence of non-native vegetation and the degree that it is now overgrown. In a Mediterranean environment such as ours, the natural fire return interval is every 3 to 5 years. In an environment that's in equilibrium with regular recurring low intensity beneficial natural fire, you see things like encroaching shrub and brush are kept back by fire, and grass is either grazed or burned off, so there isn't thick understories of thatch and so forth. But following the systematic exclusion of fire, starting around 1910 as a matter of policy, and the development of our community starting in the 30s, 40s, and 50s, and the introduction of large amounts of non-native vegetation that is not adapted to this environment, is not particularly drought tolerant, and if it is not fire adapted or fire resilient, I would argue that maintaining the current environment is not natural and maintains the conditions that will support rapid fire spread throughout the community. That said, with modifications and the potential for fire plan development and many of the ways in which a fuel break can be developed, there's nothing about a fuel break that requires the removal of mature, healthy trees. We're talking about thinning, opening things up, creating a park-like natural environment that more closely mimics the natural state of our ecosystem.
Well, I certainly agree with you there. And my family arrived in the 1950s, and we've got some photos just like you described, showing a lot of open grassland and very few oak trees. And another thing that's changed is the perennial native grasses, the bunch grasses that used to be here, were not as flammable as the annual invasives that we're choking on now. And that's something that I've been really interested in culturing on our property. But I also think that the biggest hazard in my neighborhood is my next door neighbor who has a 60-year-old shake roof. So you can do a lot with vegetation, but home hardening is important too.
I certainly agree. I would just remind, because this topic comes up regularly, that the building code, of which the fire code is a subset, does not allow us to require mandatory retrofits, and we can only require retrofits that meet the more exacting standards that are currently in place when there is either a new construction or a major remodel. So I agree. We're very concerned about the prevalence of the few remaining wood shake roofs in the community. However, by virtue of state law, that's not something we can regulate for existing roofs.
Well, fuel breaks are definitely within your ability to regulate. So they're sort of low hanging fruit, but I'd like to be sure that it's the most effective way to reduce the fire hazard.
Ms. Pearson, we would like to encourage you to at least inquire about the modification process and modifications that we've granted on other properties, because some of the concerns that you're addressing, that you're raising, are things that we have specifically addressed on other properties.
I look forward to doing that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for your comment. We've had a request to move up item 9.6, which is the last item on the
So
agenda.
President Jex, we actually have some more public comment.
Oh, okay.
Oh,
Yeah, we did receive one written public comment for items not on the agenda. It was received a little bit a while ago from Mark Evans. That was sent to the directors and is available on our website. His email requested that the board place their initial funding request on hold until further notice, and requested an opportunity to provide an update to the MOFD board at the October 18 board meeting.
okay. Thank you. Appreciate you making that comment.
And there are no more hands raised, and we have not received any written public comment.
Okay. 9.6.
And so, I'm sorry, we're moving item 9.6.
Because this is the same item that Ruben Cruz was on. So, Marcia, if there's any way, can you possibly promote Ruben? He is on Zoom.
Yeah.
Okay, I think we have him.
Ruben, can you hear us?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. All right, so members, thank you for indulging us by moving not item 9.6 up to the beginning. This item concerns the district's purchasing ordinance, and Ruben Cruz from my office will speak to the item.
Thank you, Ruben Cruz of Council with Rennie Public Law Group. Thank you for the board's the opportunity to speak on this item. The item before the board today is to introduce and waive the first reading of ordinance number 23-05, an ordinance of the Moraga-Orinda Fire Protection District of Contra Costa County, California, amending the purchasing and contracting procedures and authorities. The basic rationale, or what the purpose of the proposed changes are, is to provide more local control to the district in connection with contracting for special services. Under the law, there's two main ways in which a fire district can contract for special services. One is if it follows the contracting procedures of the principal county, which in this case would be Contra Costa County, or the other alternative would be follow a particular statutory procedure that's outlined in the public contract code that I won't go into great detail, but basically requires that for contracts that exceed $25,000 in value, there's a need to let the contract to the lowest responsible bidder. And that's a legal term of art that basically means that the person is responsible, or the vendor is responsible and has the lowest monetary amount, then the district would have to award that to that person, regardless of whether or not the district believed that another vendor was better qualified to perform the services. And so the procedures here are basically designed to provide that greater flexibility for the district. What it does is it provides changes to the existing ordinance, recognizing that. And then if the board decides to adopt the ordinance at the second reading, at a subsequent meeting, the board would then also adopt a resolution which establishes those particular procedures. And they would generally follow the procedures that are outlined by Contra Costa County. And it still doesn't do away with using things such as using solicitations, using competitive procurement, things like RFPs and whatnot. It does do it on a graduated scale, for example. So like for contracts that have a value of less than $25,000, that can be done on the open market. If it's a contract between 25 and less than $100,000, you still want to do it. You can do it through an informal bid process and solicit several vendors to do it. And then if it's $100,000 or more, it would then go through a formal competitive process. Could be an RFP, which means a request for proposal, or an invitation for bid, or other ways that are outlined in the process. One of the items that this proposed procedure would require is utilizing a process to solicit small business enterprises. That's something that's actually required in the law in connection with utilizing these services for professional services related to things related to general property and construction. So architecture, engineering, things of that nature. And so it doesn't require that we provide or award a contract to a small business enterprise, but does require that we make efforts to solicit them and make sure that they are involved in the process. So I think that sums it up. Ms. Sasser may also have some additional information, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have.
Thank you. Any questions from the board or other input from management?
So I guess I'll just this is Craig. I'll just make a comment. It seems to me that, if one writes an RFP that is detailed enough, you can you can incorporate all of the things that we want to do that we aren't now going to have to include in an RFP because you want to make what I'll call a more subjective opinion. But if you actually wrote the RFP carefully enough, you could theoretically capture all those things. We just haven't chosen to do that in the past. Having been in businesses that had very detailed RFPs in the past, that is exactly what people do, is you make sure that you write an RFP that has super detailed things that are important to you included in the RFP, not just the spec of the thing you want to be delivered. So, I like the idea of simplifying it. I understand that, the one contract we've had that this was an issue with in the last 7 years that I've been on the board, was about our auditor, and it was, I don't know what, a $40,000 contract or something, right? So we wouldn't, according to this, we wouldn't even have to have an RFP for it. I'm not sure I'm necessarily a big fan of that concept. I think I like RFPs, and I think that I like them coming to the board and, having the flexibility to not necessarily take the lowest bid, I get. But I'm not sure I'm as fond of getting rid of the RFP process that forces us to go out and get bids on things.
So, sorry.
I just, one comment, from what Craig said. Does this preclude us from RFP? It doesn't, right? We can still do it.
That's right. It is staged. And I mean, one thing to think about, the way it's staged is, so under 25,000, and this is roughly more or less what it is now too, you can solicit some bid, just get some numbers and do something. What it does between 25 and 100,000 is it allows for an informal process. By the way, your own existing rules say that, they just don't jive, unfortunately, with the state law. So we're basically just mirroring that set of rules that already exist. But that said, the point is legitimate. I mean, this came essentially out of what happened in the audit committee. And in the audit committee, Director Jex made a very eloquent argument that the two lowest bidders, if you actually looked at their bid, wouldn't have done, in his view, an adequate job. Or wouldn't have been able to on the amount of time that they were allotting to different things and things like that. So, in fact, what happened, to your point, Director Jorgens, is that what we did there, because we didn't yet have a handle on what we were going to do with this ordinance, is we did go back with a more detailed RFP, and we did end up, I think, with a result that the audit committee was satisfied with. So that absolutely is something that you can do. The other thing, though, that you can do or you can consider is if you don't want $100,000 threshold for the informal bidding, you could bring that threshold down to say 50,000 or something like that to require an RFP at that point.
In other words, we can make it more strict than the county is. We just can't make it less strict.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Because the point of the thing is that you understand the point. So you could do that. I would also say, and this is really up to staff, but my impression, I mean, I've only been here 6 years, is they run a pretty tight ship around here.
Today.
And
today,
yeah, and that most things do go by some form of RFP. And I would say, just from my own experience, because I answer RFPs day in and day out, they often are trying to balance different factors. So price is always one factor, and it gets rated. And usually that you can be as precise as you want about 40%, whatever percent you want to give it. Then there's, ability to do the job, qualifications, you can have these lists of things and what weight they're given. So it does provide you, I think, a pretty full picture if it's done well. That's that would be my observation.
So what do we do today under our current regulations for a $60,000 contract?
Go ahead.
Special services between $5,000 and $100,000 requires the informal bidding process, which is 3 bids. So we get 3 bids today.
And that's the current status quo. So that's we just copy the status quo.
Any other comments, or questions from members of the board?
I think the RFP is a good point. I think the lowest bidder part, though, even with a well-written RFP, it's not necessary. There's still some judgment that I think is helpful to have in there, and I think where we faced it is we felt very stuck with the lowest bidder concept, and we had to go back and do an inefficient process.
Can we add that contracts over a certain amount have to come to the board or something?
I believe.
I mean, we
that
currently do a
contracts-
lot of that.
I think it's everything over 10,000 comes to the board. Is that right? Or what?
So if it's a public works, it's over 10,000, and then if it's $100,000 for other contracts, but the audit contract is its own animal, so that had to be approved by the board. That's why that came to the board.
What's the definition of public works?
Anything that makes an improvement to any kind of public building.
So essentially, it's construction, although it could be.
But
Doesn't have to
everything
be.
else is 100,000.
That's right. So the professional services is 100,000. So you could change that if that was your concern, is to have better oversight over that issue as well. That's another option.
Well, I think at the moment, the practice has been that the chief actually brings large contracts to the board anyway. It's just not required. Things that aren't in the budget, it takes 2 brings to the board.
Yes, sir. If I may, so two different categories. Once we're in that, for things that are approved in the budget that the board has been presented to the board and they approved, or you all approved. If it's less than 100,000, then I sign them, not just to avoid bringing something back twice. When we've made some large purchases that were not included in the budget, specifically vehicles from the fire chief's contingency with the chip shortage, et cetera, we brought that back to the board on the theory that the board had not had a chance to weigh in on it. And while the board had allocated the fire chief contingency for this sorts of things, it would be appropriate to include the board in what's essentially a capital purchase. So generally speaking, we try to make sure the board has had a chance to approve anything that is significant, either through the budget process or the contract adoption.
But is that, I guess my question is that a practice or an actual policy?
The policy is anything over $100,000 have to come to a board. It's not in the policy that anything less than that would have to come to the board if it had not been somewhere otherwise approved.
Okay. If there are no other questions, we'll solicit comments from the general public.
So we do not have any hands raised. And I'm just checking written public comment. And we've not received any written public comment.
Okay, thank you. All right, then we'll look for a motion.
I'd like to make just one more comment
Sure.
before the motion actually is that I support these revisions. I think it increases our local control and gives us some discretion where before we had, and it also gets us into compliance with state statutes. So I support it. If you want a motion, I'll make it now. How's that?
Great.
Okay, I make a motion to waive the first reading, introduce ordinance number 23-05 as an item number 9.6.
Okay,
I'll second it.
So we'll open public comment on the motion. We do not have any hands raised or received written public comment.
we'll then have a vote.
Director Danziger.
Aye.
Director Hassler.
Aye.
Director Dorgan.
Aye.
Director Romer.
Aye.
President Jeff.
Aye. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you for.
Okay, we'll go,
Ruben. Thank you.
go back to item 7. Information only reports related to meetings or ended by directors. Any reports?
None. Questions and informational comments from board members and staff? None heard. Communications received. We received 2 communications from a homeowner in Moraga and from Sandra Fox Schoner. We will now go to the fire chief updates.
Good evening, directors. I'll handle the fire chief updates for this evening. Finance report by Mary Smith.
Good evening, directors. I have a brief finance report this evening. We'll start with the strike team reimbursement update. The strike team receivable for fiscal year 23 ended up being $1.1 million. We have received payments of $1 million, and there's an outstanding receivable of $116,659. For fiscal year 24, we have had 1 assignment to date, and that is estimated to be about $1,400. Invoices for all the fiscal year 23 assignments have been received by OES, which means they've been approved by OES, and that payment should be in process. We did receive a small payment for one of the strike team assignments on August 8th. That was the last one. Other items, the fiscal year 2023 accounting close is in process. The audit is scheduled for the week of August 28th. We had a $5 million treasury bill that matured on July 25th. The district then purchased another $5 million treasury bill on July 26th with a yield of 5.398%. The district has a total of $9 million invested in 90-day T-bills, and the next maturity will be $3 million, which matures on September 23rd. In addition, fiscal year 24 salary increases and Cicera rates have been updated in ADP and processed. That concludes my report unless there are any questions.
Any questions?
So this is Craig Jorgen. So is it going to be appropriate to ask the questions about the, how much we have invested in the, what percentage of our portfolio we have invested in the treasuries now, or when we get to the item where there's a correction later?
I think it should go under the quarterly investment report, which is on the consent calendar.
Next, human resources, Christine.
Good evening, directors. Tonight I have a brief recruitment update. So first off is firefighter paramedic trainee. So we had 5 candidates going through background, and now 4 have progressed. So 1 did not make it. And then second is the office specialist for fire prevention. So we hosted interviews a few weeks ago, and we did identify 1 candidate that was our top candidate, and that person is going through background currently, and will most likely be probably starting employment at the first or second week of September. And then for fuels mitigation specialist, that recruitment, I hosted a new recruitment, and that actually closed today at 5 o'clock. And we will be hosting interviews next week on Thursday. And then the assistant project coordinator for the Tunnel East Bay Hills fuel break project, that was opened last week, and will close on August, or the 24th, August 24th. So, and then unless there are any questions, that concludes my update. Thank you.
Christine, sorry, can you just tell us how many actual vacancies we have right now for firefighter paramedic?
We've got 7 right now.
So are we actively starting to recruit again, since we don't have, you only have 4 in the pipeline?
At this point, we're working through what we have, and then we'll determine if another recruitment will be, we would like to open another recruitment.
Do we have very many people that are going out the other end of the pipeline, or expected to?
Not sure about that. I can't speak to that.
Or with some of that's, potentially determined by age and things, right? So.
Right,
Are
yeah.
there people
I
that-
don't have any folks that have given any notice or anything like that at this point.
Do we have people who are eligible for retirement or are near that?
We do. Mhm.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, fire marshal.
Good evening, directors. Staff has been real busy. We have completed our first round of inspections in all our target areas. We have started our re-inspection process. You can see by the numbers from July 1st to the 31st, 1,384 inspections. The pass-fail numbers are there. Next slide, please, Marcia. The one thing I wanted to bring the director's attention to that I talked about back in June was our e-occupancy, or our school inspection. So when the school year ended, we sent letters to all the schools in the fire district, letting them know that we would be conducting our e-occupancy inspections in September. We sent them a copy of the inspection form, asked them if they would like, or provided the opportunity for them to self-schedule their appointments. Nobody took us up on that opportunity, so we have sent letters out to the schools. We scheduled their inspections. The first inspection begins September 5th, and our last inspection will be September 12th. And we will be going out and do those, and I'll have a better update in September on pass-fail on those. We have started our R2 occupancy inspections as well. Next slide, please. Marcia.
Is this calendar year or fiscal year
Um,
for the 22 days that we had on the chipping, for example?
that was calendar year, sir. Current projects are pretty much the same. Our inspections, property transfers, the Tunnel East Bay Hills, fuel break, shaded fuel breaks, kicked into high gear and we're working on that and I'll report on that in just a minute when we get to that section. Next slide, please, Marcia. Here's a count of our violations. Again, we're still seeing that zone 0, the 2-foot non-combustible zone, leading our number or our violations. Next slide, please. Here's a list of our fines at $500. And I think there's a little more there. Yes. Inspection map.
So just as a quick comment
Yes, sir.
back on the zone 0 idea. So I've had a number of neighbors that are now compliant, which is good, but they weren't before. And they're asking me, for example, what things they can plant that we find good at the moment, and realizing that they might become 5 feet instead of the 2 feet soon. But they're asking for acceptable plants that are more than 2 feet away, or that can be in that spot that have, branches that go up versus. So do we have a list of things that we recommend and where we recommend planting them?
Yes, sir, we do. I can, if they contact me, we have that in fire prevention, and I'll make sure we get it up on the website.
That'd be
Yeah,
great.
the irrigated green grass, succulents, anything that's in that 2-foot zone. If we have a shrub or something, it needs that 1-foot air gap, that separation. And then California Fire Code, Chapter 49, this year has listed, instead of a specific plant species, it's listed characteristics of plants. And I find that is more helpful to the homeowners. Instead of saying, hey, here are these, only these plants or not these plants, here are the characteristics that you need to look at when thinking about planting in that area.
Okay, thank you.
Yes. Quick question. I apologize if you don't have the answer to this, because it's kind of just occurred within the last half hour as I was reading through some of the stuff. The educational inspections, is that K through 12 only, or does that include St. Mary's as well?
No, sir, that's K through 12.
Because I noticed in the 2016 Standards of Coverage report that even back then, 23% of our call outs were for false alarms. And I wondered if St. Mary's was responsible for what percentage of those. Even back then, I know that it's been a subject of contention in the past that we've had a significant amount of false alarms out to St. Mary's College. And anyway, I don't want to put you on the spot. Maybe you can answer that the next time around, but it was just something that that I thought that we ought to address in the future.
Yes, sir, I can get those numbers.
Fire Marshal, I have a question too. but
Yes, sir.
Just tagging on what Director Romer said. This is Director Danzer. For the K through 12, does that include preschools?
No, sir.
Do we inspect preschools?
Yes.
What's that under?
It doesn't go under an e-occupancy in the state licensing board. If somebody's going to do a preschool, they go through state licensing. And state licensing sends us a notice and we have to go out there and inspect it.
Is that on the same cycle as K-12 or?
It's whenever a new preschool is going into service, we'll go out and inspect it. But we frequently get requests from the preschools to come out. I think it's an insurance requirement that they have a fire safety inspection every year. So we do go out regularly and inspect those.
And what about like adult? I want to call it daycare, respite places, adult services, like where seniors go to look like, I know we have some memory care, not like the places that, residential, but just, where people go on a daily basis. Like, what about those kind of places?
We don't traditionally inspect those on a yearly basis. Is they go through the licensing process in the construction. If it's new construction, we will go out and inspect it. And then during the state licensing, it's something that we can go out and inspect at that time. It is something that we can look at if that's, something the directors wanted, that our annual inspections for like B occupancy, A occupancy, different type of occupancy inspections. We have the authority to go out and do it. It's just not something that's mandated through the office of the state fire marshal.
Would those type of inspections generate a fee?
They could.
Okay.
So I guess my comment on that, and I think that's a good idea. We have there's a care facility across the street from 45, for example, several of them.
Yes.
And, you know, nationally, at least, some of them have had reputations for, you know, the same kind of things bars do. They chain things because they don't want the memory care people to get out and, you know, whatever. So it seems to me that that would be someplace that the people who live there can't necessarily do the inspection, be aware of the inspections themselves. And maybe that would be a good thing, much like the kids, you know, can't do it either. That seems like a good idea to me.
Yes, sir. I'll work on a inspection plan with the chief for those occupancies.
So I'll go ahead and pull up the,
Directors, this is the inspection map, and if we start at the top, that's the Dalewood, Sleepy Hollow area. And if you remember a couple months back, we had a lot more red in there, a lot more fails, but as the inspectors are getting back in there, doing the re-inspections, we can see the education, the outreach is really paying off. A lot of those red areas have now turned to green. We still have a little bit of work to do in there, and we're working with the homeowners. We've received several calls for extensions from homeowners due to vacations and other things, and scheduling contractors out on their property. So we're granting those. The same thing can be said for the other areas, Charles Hill and the Orinda Woods area. A lot of red when we first started. And I say a lot of heavy lifting probably went in. Those are Firewise areas. Those are areas where our fire adapted community ambassadors have really been doing a lot of work and a lot of education for us. So we can see that, you know, changing from that red to green. The next area down is down by off of Glorietta as you go into the city of Lafayette, not a Firewise neighborhood, and we had a lot of red in there originally, but the homeowners have done a great job of complying with the fire code. Again, we've had some requests for extensions due to vacations and stuff that we've been granting. The Camp Lendo neighborhood, a great Firewise partner, and they've done a lot of chipping, a lot of removal of juniper. There was red in there, and that is starting to change. Today was the 30-day mark, so the inspectors were back in there doing their re-inspections. There was over 70 piles created after our first round of pre-citations. So we're working, having our chipper in there. We thought it would be day to day and a half chipping. We're looking at 3 days chipping tomorrow with 2 chippers involved, just to provide that partnership and that collaboration with our homeowners to help them get that material removed. And then if you continue further south, a little pocket there, still a little bit of work, but the Sanders Ranch will be our next area. They still got 2 to 3 more weeks for the 30 days. But again, we hope to see that significant change. We're receiving a lot of phone calls with questions for the Sanders Ranch area, working with trying to work with the homeowners association. We have some of our fire adapted community ambassadors down there. They've done a good job of getting that community education out.
So,
Yes,
so
sir.
the green looks incredibly, you know, congratulations, you got a lot done, which is,
Thank you,
because I know that a couple of years ago, I bet almost the whole thing was red. So that's
Yes.
amazing progress. Do you have any ideas of how to make it even better? In other words, what can we do is it education? Is it enforcement? Is it materials to supply the chipper? You know, is there anything to make the red go green sooner and more easily, and both there and the rest of the community?
I think heavy focus on our public education definitely helps, getting out with the property owners, walking their property. We have those that are true believers, and then we have those that just, you know, they don't want to hear it. And I think that's where the enforcement tool comes in, and the mechanism, the pre-citation, the citation. And we've had numerous people call us and say, hey, you got my attention. I'm doing the work, can we waive the citation? And as we've always said, this isn't a revenue generator. This is a way to grab their attention, and we're happy if the work's complete and they're compliant with the fire code to waive that. I think, sir, to answer your question, it's kind of a combination of everything. Heavy public education, the chipper program is really great. Cooperative tool to work with the neighborhoods to let them know, we're here to assist you in this process.
So I think this year, at least I know in the northern part, they sent people out in advance, to say, we're here to tell you what's going to need to be done and we're coming back. It looks like that might have worked a lot.
Yes, sir. I would agree with you.
So are we going to plan on continuing that concept?
Yes, sir. That would be my plan next year,
Cool.
is to pre-saturate the areas and let people know, hey, here's our targeted areas. Here's where we're coming. Here's the date we're coming. And work with our Firewise neighborhoods, our ambassadors, to really get that message out.
Great, good, great job.
Thank you, sir. And I think there's one more slide. Is that correct, Marcia? Okay. Directors, the Tunnel East Bay Hill Shaded Fuel Break Project is really kicked off. 3 weeks, a lot of work going on. We're finishing up work area 2. And I don't have the map to show you. I'll have the map with acres to report out next month. But work areas 1 and 2 are complete. The PSA from CAL FIRE's VTP process has been approved, and we start working in the VTP areas off East Bay Mud land starting tomorrow. So a lot of good stuff going with the fuel break. We did have a day where some of our local elected officials, Director Jackson, you participated, where we did a tour of the fuel break, and we hope to continue that and do numerous
Gonna comment. Very impressive when you actually see it having completed. I mean, they've done a really first-class job, I think.
Thank you,
Doing
sir.
what they
Yeah.
did. I was really very impressed.
Yeah, and we plan to do more of those, so get people out. And I noticed some of the residents that were there, they struggle with shaded fuel break versus a fire break. Sometimes they hear us and they go, I got to take all the vegetation out, or no, this is a shaded fuel break. And they were very impressed with the work and glad to see we were doing what we were doing.
So is there a meter that says, we're this far along, we spent this much of our money, is there a run rate? How much a day are we spending? Anything like that?
Not yet, sir, but I can have that for next month.
Okay.
And that concludes my report, unless there's any additional questions. We'll go to Operations Battalion Chief Steve Gailey.
Good evening, directors. I'm here tonight to give you a brief overview of what your firefighters been doing for the last month, and I got a few snapshots of incidents and some training events that have occurred. It's been a busy month for us. We're obviously ramping up for wildland season. Our members have been participating in multiple wildland trainings, ranging from off-road driving to actual live burn events. Crews have been participating in multiple drills throughout the month, one being a multi-agency drill focusing on IMCI events. That has got us an opportunity to place our new ballistic gear in service. We also been working on our third quarter EMS, which is focusing on C-spine procedures and traumatic injuries. We also had 2 individuals who on July 24th completed their 18-month probationary process successfully. That individuals are firefighter paramedic Matthew Cooper and Kevin Pobray. Going to the site we're at right now, this is our first incident I have for you. This was a B shift fire on Fernwood, reported structure fire that ended up being an exterior fire that started to extend to the Bravo side of the structure, and was thankfully a quick knockdown by engine 42 to keep it from going into the structure. Next slide, please, Marcia. Here is also another incident on B shift. We've had several vehicle accidents this month. This one, as you can see, was a rollover, which required the occupant who received major injuries to be extricated using extrication equipment to remove the roof there to get the patient out of the vehicle. Next slide, please. One opportunity we've had as far as training this month is we've been working with the Contra Costa County Fire Protection District with an abandoned structure that we have in Lafayette. This is a garden style apartment that is set to be destroyed here in the next year or so, which provides us the opportunity to run multi-drills, ladder the building. We may even be able to, practice forced entries, cutting holes in the roof eventually once they're closer to when they're going to be scheduled to destroy the building. But for the next couple months, we have this structure in Lafayette to go out and use kind of to our disposal. So we're getting quite a bit of touches there, and especially as you can see here, where we can actually use that to give different opportunities for our truck crews to spot the roof and look at roof access for apartment style complexes like this. Next slide. One thing that our crews have been busy with is several of our prescribed fire projects. The one I'm going to focus on and what we have focused on mostly for this month is projects that are technically maintenance for the North Orinda shaded fuel break that we burned along the Bear Creek Road. This is going to be on the south side of Bear Creek Road, basically from the staging area to almost the Happy Valley intersection. Next slide, please. One key thing that we're focusing on with these prescribed burns is you can see we're only burning approximately 20 to 50 feet from the roadway. And as I mentioned, this is a part of the fuel break as far as maintenance. But a key thing that we want to consider here in this scenario is that while removing this vegetation that we have in that first 20 to 50 feet prevents the incident if we have a car fire either on the roadway or that goes into the road or off the roadway into the brush. That now that with that fuel removed, it is very unlikely that that car fire will extend into any vegetation. Next slide, please. And as you can see here, as a member, one of the big helps we had with this project is Crew 12 from Contra Costa County Fire Protection District. They helped us tremendously, especially with this prescribed fire project. So you can see him here putting some fire on the ground. Next slide. And here's a few marks as you can see along Bear Creek Road. In total, we burned approximately 11 acres along the roadway. And our goal is that, again, as I mentioned, with that vehicle fire scenario or a north wind event scenario, that we have some fuel that has been removed that creates a safer environment for a fire coming out of the Barones and, could have an impact on that Sand Hill, Sunnyside, or Delwood communities. Next slide. On Friday, August 11th, we hosted a large training event that was attended by agencies from 5 different Bay Area counties. This was a large event. I think total 15 agencies attended. This is what we call our Painted Rock Burn Site, which is joint managed by the John Muir Land Trust and the Moraga-Orinda property. Next slide. This incident with the agencies that attended, along with crews, engines, overhead, a big shout out to the comp volunteers who provided logistic operations for us, but we had a total of 160 personnel on this fire. So you can see here in this briefing, we had a lot of people to coordinate, to get out on the site and conduct their operation. We actually conducted 3 separate burn operations that day since we had so many people. Next slide. Some of the training that was done that day was based on fire and operations, but crews also got a chance to put some hose on the ground, work on some off-road driving. Like I said, we had 3 separate fire and operations going. So this was also a great training event for our overhead, which was all filled by individuals from the fire district to work on coordinating between divisions, branches, ICs, our local stakeholders. And it was an all-around good experience for all those folks. Next slide. We should have one more video on the next slide, Marcia. right, so as you guys saw in the last two videos, and especially this last one, and as we saw throughout the day on the 11th, is in this environment with the fuel loading that we had, it definitely gave us some erratic fuel behavior. And as you can see with the smoke conditions, we had some significant fire for certain parts of this training. And I want to remind everyone that this training occurred on a very favorable weather day with minimal winds, low temps, humidities were in the 70s. And this, as it may seem like a lot of fire, it was a very controlled environment. And I want to take into consideration, this scenario happening in an environment that is not controlled on a red flag that can definitely produce some significant fire and fire weather from a scenario like this. So the importance of being able to conduct this, a training operation, but to remove this vegetation in a controlled environment for those local communities is a huge benefit. Next slide, please. And lastly, at the end of the day, this is what we had, totaling 150 acres, again, of John Muir Land Trust and the Moraga-Orinda. We removed quite a bit of vegetation from that area, and it ended up being a very successful training event for all those who attended. And that's the end of report. Any questions?
I don't necessarily have a question, but I do want to take the time, particularly for the benefit of folks that are seeing this for the first time, to congratulate Chief Galing, Chief Winokur, and the 160 people who firefighters who participated in this, as well as the community, and also the John Muir Land Trust. I want to disclose that from the time that I was a volunteer with the support unit, I've helped out on about 3 or 4 of these. Unfortunately, I was out of state and unable to be there personally for this one. But the first one I participated in, Chief Winokur and I met with the representatives of the John Muir Land Trust. And they're not just passively agreeing with this, they're actively appreciating that this not only protects the community from a conflagration, that it helps to restore that land to its natural condition. And they are working hand in glove, and I assume.
And Director Romer, can you unmute your microphone, please?
Oh, I'm sorry. They're actively working hand in glove with the department in order to help restore that area to what they consider to be a more natural environment as it existed 100 years ago. I'm sorry, I was so enthusiastic about making my comments that I didn't unmute my microphone, but in sum, I want to congratulate Chief Galing, Chief Winokur, the 160 firefighters, and to express my appreciation for the John Muir Land Trust, because the John Muir Land Trust has been an active participant and partner in this for years.
Would you like to open public comment on our announcements?
Open public, any comments?
We do not have any hands raised. We do not have any written public comment or in person.
Okay. We can move on to the consent agenda.
I would just request that we take I think Gloria, you said it was the quarterly investment report 8.5 off so we can discuss it.
I'd like to pull 8.6.
Okay.
And do we have a motion for 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, 8.4, 8.7?
I move that we approve 8.1, 8.2, 8.3, 8.4, and 8.7.
Second.
Second by Romer. So we'll open public comment on the motion. We do not have any public comment. Director Danziger.
Aye.
Director Hassler.
Aye.
Director Jorgen.
Aye.
Director Romer.
Aye.
President Jex.
Aye.
So we will take item 8.5.
Okay, so I just had a question. I noticed that we had, like triple the amount of money in the I forget what LEI, whatever the the investment thing is we invest in, that's earning 3.6%, and we're earning dramatically more than that, almost double that, or 80% more in our treasuries. So how did we decide to only invest as much as we were? You can buy 1 month treasuries also. So since we're earning so much more on those things, and they also don't have write-offs, how are we deciding how much to invest?
So a couple of things to point out. So first is that we started with the T-bills and we have $9 million in the T-bills. And as you know, this was the first time that we've done it. So I'm learning how it goes and seeing how it works and so forth. So at this point, we had $9 million in there. Then the second thing to point out, in July, then we had over $7 million in cash that went out in July because we prepaid Cesara. So at July 31st, the balance in the LAIF account is at $8.7 million. So it's actually less than what we have in T-bills. So July is kind of an unusual month for us cash flow wise. So I had to account for that as well. So that's kind of where we're at this point.
But that means that I guess the question is, do we have any other big lump sums like that, or is it a pretty normal, winding down of again, do we do a monthly cash flow and, forecast so that we have an idea of how much we're going to use every month?
So I have a cash flow that goes backwards, but not forward. So there's a lot going on right now. So for instance, the fuel break, the shaded fuel break that we're talking about, that cash flow, as well as we have some significant other expenditures. So we have not had a chance yet to start looking in a forward. I'm gonna have to work with the battalion chiefs as well as the fire marshal and the fire chief if we're gonna get more aggressive, have less liquid investments and more into treasuries, if that is what the board would like to see.
When you say less liquid, you can sell a treasury before it matures. That's not a problem. You can sell it in one day, you get whatever the value is that day, and it doesn't vary very much because if you buy 1 month ones, the discount you would have relative to, the market value, interest rates won't change very much in that month. So they're incredibly liquid. Literally, if you know 1 day in advance, you can have the cash the next day. So, I assume we know at least a day in advance when we're going to have bills that come due. So because the rate of return is so much different on the treasuries than we're getting from the county, it seems to me that we should be much more, and it's worth a lot of money. What's the differential been so far and how much we've earned on the treasuries versus what we would have been earning in the county? It seems to me it's, like $100,000. So I can't think of something better to do with our time than earn that kind of money on the extra balance that we have.
Yes, sir. Understood. As we discussed before, we've been easing into this and learning. Obviously, staff is fully subscribed with a lot of other things as well, with things, the fuel break and the other expenditures Gloria mentioned, as well as we move into the heart of fire season, strike team activity can have significant variation to payroll. That said, we're learning, we're getting smarter about this. We've been easing into a more aggressive investment posture. We can certainly take advantage of shorter maturing T-bills in order to be more aggressive. But I do just want to caution that there are all of these things do require management, and the people that would be managing them are doing other things as well. But we are not. I wouldn't say we believe we have optimized the investment position yet, but we've been easing in that direction and certainly take your direction to heart.
Again, there's a lot of money involved.
And I just have a couple of quick comments. Number one is to congratulate Director Jorgens because this was his idea, and I think it's a great one. However, it's not without risk. And I think that if there's a situation in which the government is facing, which Congress is facing the possibility of not being able to extend the national debt, we've gone past that one. But I did notice that Moody's downgraded U.S. debt unexpectedly just within the past month. I don't think that's had any immediate effect on T-bills, but that is the kind of thing that we need to monitor. We'll probably need to have board oversight as well as staff oversight over that. So I agree with the idea of easing into it too, but keeping our antenna out for anything that would increase the risk of those investments.
It's still the least risky investment in the world.
By
definition.
I agree, but nothing is without risk.
don't forget the alternative that we have is more risky, which we're going to talk about later, because the county is investing in longer term things instead of shorter term things. And that's more risky by definition.
I
So
agree.
the place we're going when we are more aggressive with this is to less risk, not more risk. The county has exactly the same risks for the government default as we do, but they're taking a longer view and it's more subject to interest rate changes when you do that. So we're actually becoming more conservative when we invest these things ourselves in short-term securities than the county.
And I think as the Federal Reserve reduces rates, it makes these better investments too.
Exactly.
That's
Any
all I
other
have.
questions in regards to 8.5 or the other ones were pulled? I have just a question, and Steve alluded to it. We started the fiscal year with 20 million or 26 million. First month, which was the largest month of the year, 7 million that was paid out, which included a portion of the pension fund benefit that was sent to Cirrus, which leaves us 19 million for the balance of the year. Do we have a forecast because of the fuel break and potential if we participate in any major fires that we're going to again require significant overtime? Is there a plan over the next 5 months in terms of what we think we're going to be spending and how long it's going to take us to collect that money from the state if we expand in our activity on the fuel break?
No, I have not seen a financial plan for the fuel break.
There's a budget as to what we're doing, and if we complied with the budget or adopted the budget that is in there, and for the other grant or partial grant money, it's significant. We're talking about 5 million or $4 or $5 million expenditure that we would have to fund.
So we're doing quarterly invoices to the state, and the state has started paying on the fuel break. So the money is flowing from the state once we spend it for the fuel break, but I have not seen a forward plan of how much we're going to spend this fiscal year.
Because if I remember on the last fuel break project, that was the thing that forced us into a situation where we did have to borrow money under the teeter plan. And that would be disastrous, particularly with our capital program, because you have to spend all that money too as well that we've dedicated for.
So I guess the bottom line is, at least I don't think we necessarily did it because I assumed it was going to happen anyway. On the last one, we had a financial forecast up front for what we thought was going to, the cash flows of the fuel break. It's a $6 million project. It's a fifth of our budget. Seems to me that it'd be a good thing to have a financial forecast for.
Yeah, if I may, sir, the 2019 North Orinda Shaded Fuel Break was different in several accounts. One was that since CEQA was waived, we didn't have the lengthy environmental review process that was outside of our control that was just completed. So we did not know how long it was going to take to get the Cal VTP PSA back. And that made it challenging to plan in advance until that was known. The second element is that as with the 2019 fuel break, we were under significant pressure to complete it very quickly by virtue of being one of the governor's priority projects. This is a multi-year project, and we've been very deliberate in the slow pace of ramping up the project in accordance with our capacity to manage it. As with many other things, we have a dedicated position that's overseeing it, but that was only recently filled, and before that, that was primarily being filled by the fire marshal in addition to his other duties. So the position we've taken thus far has been that we were event-driven, not plan-driven, based on our capacity and our ability to expand at a sustainable rate. As we get we have an assistant fuel or project manager position that is currently posted and be filled. Once we get that position filled and we've had a chance to essentially learn more about the team, learn more about the project, and learn more about the speed with which we can move, at that point, we'll bring forward a detailed plan. But from my estimation, it'd be premature to do so because there's so many unknowns that are outside of our control. And we're attempting to move at a very deliberate pace based on events on the ground that are simply we're not able to forecast those at this point.
Well, I guess I personally have a problem with that then, because if we have 20 some people out there working 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, and we don't even know how much money we're spending. To me, that's an interesting challenge. And I've worked on lots of projects in my life that have lots of variables and unknowns. And, we need a 5-line model that tells us roughly how much we're going to spend, how much we spend per crew per day. We know roughly how many crews we're going to have. It doesn't have to be super accurate. It just has to be something, because at the moment, we just found out earlier tonight that we don't know how much money we're spending every month.
Well, okay, so we know how much money we have spent, sir. Going forward, we don't, for a number of reasons. We could spend a lot of time planning. I'm certainly open to taking that direction from the board. I wouldn't recommend that though, because at this point, most of that plan is not going to survive first contact with the weather conditions, with the biological monitoring, with all of the other factors that are outside of our control. And this would definitely be a case of plan early, plan often. But as I said, if it is the board's pleasure that we do that, we can. I would caution that will mean there are other projects such as our ongoing fire prevention work in many of the neighborhoods that will suffer as staff resources are pulled off of those onto planning for the field break.
I'm talking about a model that'll take an hour to produce. If you give me the numbers, I'll personally produce it in an hour and be done. That's the level of accuracy I think would be appropriate, but not having the board work on approve a $6 million project. And so far we haven't been told how much we spent to date. And we said just now we didn't have that number at hand, and we don't know what our burn rate is, even today's burn rate. That's not a level of detail that I feel comfortable with on that size project.
Yes, sir. Those I apologize for not being there in person. Those numbers are known, and the daily rate is known, and the money expended so far and the invoices submitted to the state, those are known. I'd be happy to get you that information.
I didn't hear this, Director Jacks. The issue is with regards to the time that money we have to fund before we get reimbursed. And you said you're doing quarterly?
Yes, quarterly reimbursement invoices to the state.
So that means that at least we have a 3-month uncollected receivable.
Correct.
Well, month and a half.
Well, yeah,
Well,
whatever.
How long does it take the state to reimburse that though?
Well, that's the issue. In the past, we had problems. Supposedly that issue's been resolved. But if the burn rate is, let's just say if we did 3 million this year, that's $3 million we have to fund out of the 19 million we have left, and we've got 5 months of operations to cover. So it is critical, I think, that we at least have some estimation, even if it's not accurate.
Yeah,
But there is in the budget a plan in terms of, at least for the year, in terms of what we were going to do if we, at some point. Even if we follow that plan, it's big dollars.
Well, it's roughly 2 million. It's a $6 million thing, takes 3 years. It's $2 million a year, right? Big picture. Assuming we spend it evenly, which we're not.
Well, maybe for this Director Danziger, maybe for future agenda items, we could ask for something. Get to that.
And again, I'm talking about, like I say, a 5-line model that has, literally 5 entries by month, or and it's going to be a guess, but at least it's something.
Yes, sir. The direction is understood.
Is the quarterly billing instead of monthly billing our choice or their choice?
I'm not sure. I'll have to look at the contract and see if we can, right, I don't know.
Because we pay the contractors on a bi-weekly, twice a month. How often do we actually pay the contractors?
Sir, I require the contractors to give me weekly invoices. So then it takes a couple days for me to review them and then to get them off to Mary. And then the question about the quarterly invoices, that's set by CAL FIRE. So we can submit quarterly. We can't submit any sooner than that.
that quarterly billing is the one that bothers me. Because that means at least you're looking at, even if they turn around in 30 days, that's 4 months worth of funding that we have to put out.
And a 5% interest, that's a lot of foregone interest.
Well, it sounds to me like staff is going to return with a little more analysis.
Great.
Okay,
Item 8.5.
Sure, I'll move that we can approve 8.5.
Second.
Moved by Jorgen, second by Romer. We'll open public comment on the motion. We do not have any public comment. Director Danziger,
Aye.
Director Hassler.
Aye.
Director Jorgen.
Aye.
Director Romer.
Aye.
President Jex.
aye. Okay.
Item 8.6.
Yeah, I asked for that to just be pulled. This is the item to increase our minimum fund balance to 40%. And this item, the changes are made verbally during the July meeting, and we're not taking a vote today on it. With no votes required, except on the consent calendar. So I just wanted to state that excuse me, that I was not in favor of increasing it to 40%.
I think we actually did have a vote and you voted no.
That's correct.
That's
Just
my
wanted
recall.
to-
So we did have a vote.
Well, the reason this recent discussion,
I know.
the 40%, you need 40%.
I understand that. I just wanted to
50%.
state that
Yeah.
I didn't
Yeah.
vote for
Yeah, if you didn't have it, you couldn't operate.
Okay.
this.
Anyway, okay,
Do we have a motion to approve consent item 8.6?
So moved.
Second.
Romer.
Jorgens.
We'll open public comment on
Comment.
8.6. We do not have any public comment. Director Danziger,
No,
Director Hassler.
Aye.
Director Jorgen.
Aye.
Director Romer.
Aye.
President Jex.
aye. Okay. That's it, completes the consent agenda. Move on to 9.1.
Good evening, directors. Item 9.1 is to approve the annual comprehensive financial report as of the fiscal year ended June 30, 2022, along with the communication with those charged with governance and independent accountants report up on agreed upon procedures for appropriations limit. So at the May 2023 board meeting, the board voted to accept the draft audit reports as presented, including the draft management letter that was prepared by Ide Bailey, who is the district auditor as of June 30, 2022. The day after the May board meeting, I sent an email to Ide Bailey directing them to issue all reports final. On July 31st, I received an email from Ide Bailey, which stated that an uncorrected misstatement was noted during review of the work papers relating to the market value of the local agency investment fund. The email said GASB Statement 31 requires that investments in governmental pools be adjusted to fair value. The amount should have been adjusted down $203,135. The auditor said the adjustment is immaterial and will not impact the financial statements, but is included in the representation letter. On August 1st, I received the final issued audit reports from Ide Bailey. The management letter, which is included as attachment C for item 9.1, was changed from the previously presented version that came to the board in May. The final management letter was different, and it states that there is an immaterial, uncorrected financial statement misstatement, which resulted in the overstatement in the fair value of the local agency investment fund for $203,135. So Ide Bailey audit partner Ahmad Garibay is in attendance this evening to answer any questions the board may have, including the additional cost to reissue the final reports to correct the late balance to market value if the board chooses this option. This concludes the staff report.
Just have it's Craig, I have a question. So did they actual, in other words, was it a market value of the portfolio? Did they actually sell the bonds? I assume they're bonds that are bills or whatever they had. Did they sell those and actualize the loss, or was it just a mark-to-market loss that eventually went away?
So it's an accounting loss. It's unlikely a cash loss. We are already in August of 23 now. And this is what was reported as of June 30, 22. The requirement is because these bonds, and they are, I think, 2/3 of that portfolio is invested in treasuries. And they are, last I checked, were like less than 300 days in maturity. So likely the county or the state controller is gonna hold these treasuries till maturity. But the rules are the rules. GASB requires making adjustments to these bonds based on the market value. Because currently the treasurer is holding bonds, say at 3%, and the market rate is 4%, and that's what the requirement is. It's an accounting loss. It's not a cash loss.
Question, so there's additional cost associated with restating?
Yeah, so the financial statements, as they were presented to you back in May, were not changed. It's just that this item is reported. We believe it's immaterial. It's very small in relation to the overall financial statements. Coupled with the fact that we are in 2023, there were no actual losses that were reported by LAIF. So it's just a compliance with the requirement. It is an estimate. It is a timing difference. And so whatever it was in 22, it already adjusted in the 23. These numbers are already reported to you. I saw an item on the agenda about LAIF for this upcoming item, and there are no losses that were reported as of 23.
Okay, any other questions from the board?
So what's the other third of the portfolio invested in?
US agencies and some municipals. I don't have the distribution, but I want to say 95% is the combination of treasuries and US agencies.
So why would we invest in munis that? Why would they invest in munis that that pay less when we aren't a taxpayer? Because almost by definition are for taxpayers.
Yeah, so investments in California, they have history. Started with Orange County about 20 years ago. And so the state legislation restricts the investment that you can invest in. They have to have 5 years in maturity or less. Predominantly, they prefer that you have treasuries and agencies, and the state assembly is in the opinion that governments are there to keep liquidity as opposed to investments. I'm not sure what the purpose is. If you were a pension fund, obviously your objective would be completely different. But there's a lot of restrictions in the government code as to what LAIF, what the district, what many other governments can invest in. It's short-term securities. That's what they prefer. I believe there's a section in there that corporate notes are restricted to a certain percentage, and it's less than, I can't remember, 30% of the portfolio cannot be more than 30% cannot be in corporate notes. So state legislation, they prefer less riskier investments like the treasuries. That's their preference. And that's what everybody else typically does, including the state controllers.
Yet another reason not to keep any of our money in those funds, because they invest in things that earn less than we can do. And a longer maturity, because by definition, all of our money gets spent every year. So we clearly wouldn't want to have anything that was actually a year of maturity. Because we, by definition, would have to, it's more risky to have them that long. Sorry.
This is Director Romer. You made a reference to Orange County, and I wonder if that's my same recollection as about 1994. Somebody in Orange County, the treasurer, had the bright idea of investing the Orange County treasuries in derivatives,
Correct.
which led to Orange County almost having to access the municipal bankruptcy laws.
That's correct.
So you have somebody making bad decisions that results in the legislature maybe overreacting.
That's correct. So government code 53600
was issued right after Orange County, restricting everybody to 5-year investments. Significant portion of it has to be in treasuries and agencies. That's the state legislation preferences. And the idea was, if you're a pension fund, you invest. If you're a government, you're accumulating resources to spend them. So liquidity is of significance to government, and that's the purpose of short-term maturities. And hence this loss that is reported in there, while it's a GASB loss, it is really an accounting loss. You're not going to lose money. The maturity for LAIF is 300 days, average maturity is 300 days. So many of those securities that you were invested in 22 likely had already been cashed out and matured. And so there were no losses incurred.
Yeah.
And my understanding is we don't mark to market unrealized losses on a daily basis or on a monthly basis. We do that on a yearly basis.
Yes.
right?
And so if you look at your financial statements, it's the first time ever you do see a negative revenue number in there. And the district prudently did adjust all their investments. LAIF historically has always been at 99.999% or 100.0001% market to cost valuation. It is the first year, this year, where this percentage became over 1%. And that's obviously because of the increase in interest rates.
Okay, I'd like to move on.
I have one more question.
Okay.
Maybe I missed it here, but what's the increased cost for the audit? I didn't see that. Do we know what that is?
Yes, and so that would be roughly about 20 hours. I have to, it's frankly speaking, I really don't think it's that significant to the reader of the financial statements, but roughly it's going to be a couple of $1,000s to $3,000 to reissue these.
Okay,
financial
I'd like to go out for public comment or question.
And so we will open public comment. And we do not have any public comment.
Okay, then I'd like to make a recommendation. I looked on page 6, the net position, which was 8,486,000. And a switch from prior year, which was a deficit, a negative of 13,000,006. Either way, when you look at it, it's not a significant issue.
Yes.
It's not going to influence any decisions. It's probably, it's an accounting loss, but it's not a real loss because those would be liquidated at par.
That's correct.
When they come due. And so I would just like to make a recommendation that we proceed with the audit as it was issued without a restatement.
I agree.
Yeah, I'd second that.
I would too. So the point is you haven't redone it yet. So it would be a bill if we did it, but you haven't actually done it yet.
We have not done it yet.
Okay, so I agree with you, John.
Yeah. So I don't think we need to incur that cost of doing it.
Right.
So.
Okay.
I make,
So we need a motion in a second.
So
we have a motion.
This says we're approving it as is that right?
We've previously approved the report back in May. Is that correct?
So you need to approve the final reports tonight, which are in attachments B, C, and D. So that should be the motion. Approve what's up on the slide, approve all the audit reports
As it was issued.
as issued by Ide Bailey, correct?
Right.
So I move that we approved 9.1 as written.
A
I
second.
second. We already have a second.
Okay. Any
I
public
just have
comment?
one question. Would we include in that just the letter that we got from Ide Bailey noting this? Would
No.
that go in the audit or?
Right, that's a separate communication. It's
Yeah.
the communication. Let's see, wherever it is, it's right. Yeah, the independent accountants report and the communication with those charged with governance. So that is all part of the official audits. Yes.
So we'll open public comment on the motion. We do not have any public comment.
And we'll take a roll call.
Director Danziger,
Aye.
Director Hassler.
Aye.
Director Jordan.
Aye.
Director Romer.
Aye.
President Beck.
Aye. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.
9.2, direct investment rate of return on discounted rate.
Good evening, directors. Preparation of the district's updated OPEB actuarial valuation report is in process. As part of the process for the new report, the actuary requested from Highmark Capital Management the most recent long-term capital market return estimates as it pertains to the district's OPEB plan. The updated projected long-term expected rate of return for the district's OPEB portfolio is 7.31% net of fees. So there's 3 different rates that the board needs to direct for this agenda item tonight. The first is the investment rate of return to use for the valuation. The second is the discount rate of the liabilities for the valuation. And the third rate is the discount rate to use for the pension rate stabilization trust funding in the next long-range financial forecast update. And so please note that the board is not required to change the rates. The board can approve the same rates as used in the prior year. This concludes the staff report.
Okay. Any comments from board or questions?
So I guess my 2 bits worth on that would be, returns are pretty squirrely in the market. The interest rates are currently high. I think everybody expects them to come back down, which means the returns in the market are quite possibly going to come back down. So I think from a long-term forecast standpoint, I don't see any reason to change what we've been using.
Great comments.
How long have we, this is Director Hassler, how long have we been using those rates or those new rates for this year?
A lot of 3 or 4 years, at least 5 years.
Okay.
Right, pretty close. Yes.
Got it. Okay.
The market's gone up, the market's gone
Yeah.
down, the market's, and the interest rates have only gone up, by the way, they haven't gone back. They haven't
Right.
gone down. But,
Yeah, the
It's-
volatility in the market
Continues.
is crazy. So I would say what we've done in the past is, I would agree.
Mhm.
Go out for public comment.
And so we do not have any public comment.
so I move that we keep the rates the same.
Second.
We'll open public comment on the motion. We have no public comment. Director Danziger.
Aye.
Director Hassler.
Aye.
Director Jorgen.
Aye.
Director Romer.
Aye.
President Jex.
Aye. 9.3. Standards of coverage draft.
So Chief Winiger will be providing this report.
Maybe.
Good evening, directors. As you've seen in the staff report and in the elements that were circulated, following up the board's direction to pursue a standards of cover report, a list of elements that would be included in the RFP, a draft list, have been included for the board's direction. I have a late ad that would be added that to look at best practices that are used in other areas, both outside of our local area and then in other countries with advanced fire and EMS systems to ensure that the RFP is being informed by a wide-ranging view of other options that are out there. I'd be happy to entertain any questions or allow the board to further discuss any other items that they would like to see included. Just as a reminder, once we have the board's direction about the elements to be included in the RFP, we would turn to on crafting an RFP with sufficient detail that the people who responded to it, who bid on it, had a really detailed understanding of what we were asking so that they could appropriately shape their bid, and we wouldn't see either change orders later or discover later in the process that there were elements that we would like to have seen included to the point of the conversation around the purchasing ordinance. This is one of those items where having a great deal of specificity in the RFP that reflects the board's desire with regard to what items they would like to see researched and involved as part of the standards of cover would be very helpful. To know that information in advance, as it would be challenging to add entirely new elements without change orders later in the process. With that, I'd be happy to answer any questions or support the board's conversation if necessary.
I have just a few questions, mostly for clarification. Since the last time we did it was 2016. Is the CFAI analysis model still the current model that is used to develop these?
Yes, sir. I believe it's been updated since the standard that was used in 2016. But yes, that's still the general model that is used to outline the various components that should be included. There have been some advances since 2016 in GIS mapping having to do with unit availability, and then some more detail that have been added in the unit availability to now look at UHU by hour instead of looking at it by 24 hours. That's generally a new development in the last several years that wasn't included in older standards of government.
Okay, and just in reviewing this document as well as Berkeley's, I just want to, and maybe some of these things are just taken, I mean, are just done without us having to mention them, but I was wondering, do we need to put in there to look at how our staffing and response times compared to NFPA standards? I mean, is that just something that's a taken that will happen?
I would assume that nothing is a taken, sir. The contractor is going to write the report essentially that we asked them to. We could do a very limited SOC. We could do a much more detailed one. So anything that directors desire to see included, such as reference to NFPA standards for both response times and apparatus staffing for fire and for EMS, which are two different standards, that would be very helpful to know that in advance, sir.
I would like to see that in there. For one. And I also wanted to know if you know, they make recommendations, and I'd like to know that any of the recommendations they make, could they foresee any effect on our ISO ratings for our district?
Yes, sir. So I could add a reference to an NFPA 1710 review, and then a review on what it would take to either increase or decrease our ISO rating. Currently, we're in ISO 3, which we've had since right around the time of the 2016 standards of cover. I believe it was finalized in 2017. But that could certainly be included as ISO is very relevant to the community.
Good. And let's see. You know, our community, I think, is unique in many ways. The topography, and I think the population as well. And I just want to ensure that when they do this report, that they consider our topographical features here, our demographics, you know, just all that, everything. And to me, it looks like that standard that would be included. I mean.
Yes, sir. I think if we look, I'm just looking at the questions that are currently included. So under F, based on existing station locations, provide a threat hazard identification for wildfire, EMS, and structure situations. And then, right, and then if we, right, so then J, detailed specifics for the Moraga-Orinda Fire District as a whole by electoral district, station district, any other geographic subdivision or statistical breakdown that may be requested. I understanding your interest there. I think that one could be added to include a detailed assessment of the topography of the community, the distribution of the community, and then the demographics of our population.
Right. Okay.
How narrow the roads are, all those things, you know.
And you know, in reading the 2016 SOC, I read of the recommendations that were made in that report. Some of them were done, some of them weren't done. I mean, some of them were kind of outside of our ability to do, you know, such as increasing the size of our training facility. I mean, I don't know. And then also the number one recommendation was to, the way I read it, was to increase staffing for an ambulance at Station 45. So I just wonder if a new SOC takes those recommendations into consideration that were made in 2016, or I'm just asking you, Chief, do they start all over, or do they look at those at that report as well?
Well, I think a lot of that depends on the consultant and what their opinion is of what's been done before. There are elements in the 2016 SOCs, such as history, the environment, et cetera, that are largely unchanged, that will probably be brought across. As the 2016 SOC referenced the 2006 SOC, certainly any new one would reference both the presence of those previous works, the recommendations that were made, and then also probably opine on what is the same and what is different since the time those were written. Given how static our community is, obviously there have not been a great deal of changes to the built environment, minor, but not significant. But there may have been significant changes to the demographics. That would be the sort of thing that the report would tease out. And from that could start to provide some value judgment about the degree to which unrealized recommendations from those prior reports, how those would be weighted in the current report, but certainly they would be acknowledged if nothing else.
But for me, I think the two big things as far as what's been, it's not only what has been built. Wilder is an example. I'm pretty sure pretty much got built all 100% of it since then. But we also have, at least in, I don't know about Moraga, but Orinda certainly has a downtown plan that's been approved now, finally, that is dramatically different than the status quo. And has, you know, lots more people that are going to live here, and, you know, and so much more dense population. I realize evacuation isn't our problem, but, you know, emergency response is, and traffic from evacuations can affect that.
The Moraga town specific plan, I think, is the same.
Yes, sir. Under section 2A items I, and IV, I called out the developments that I'm aware of: the Moraga Town Center specific plan, the Orinda Downtown precise plan, the continuing development of Wilder, and any possible transit-oriented developments located at or near the Orinda BART station, which would be obviously under BART's purview. And so those were included for review to understand the impacts presented by new and projected accessory dwelling units, lot splits, planned high-density residential development, not limited to what was below. The summary should include details related to the square footage, total occupancy, intended use, and key project timelines of the projects that are proposed, perhaps in either permitting or construction phases below.
Yeah. I agree, it was all in there.
This is Director Jacks. Just a question. The consultants that do this type of work, are there a lot to choose from, or is it a relatively small pool?
In our area, generally speaking, there are 3 that I'm aware of and 2 that are very prolific.
And the question there is, do we want to go with somebody that's local, or do we want to go with somebody that has maybe broader experience nationally or internationally? So I think we'll have to kind of think about the pros and cons of that.
Okay, any other comments? If not, we'll ask for public comment.
So public comments open. We do not have any public comment.
Okay,
This is just an information only, right?
Correct.
Okay. Good job. Yeah.
okay. All right, thank you very much. We'll move on then to item 9.4.
Directors, the district received a grant to purchase self-contained breathing apparatus. An RFP was issued to purchase it. One bid was received. Staff recommends the board authorize the purchase of Scott self-contained breathing apparatus from All Star Fire Equipment in the amount of $536,888.22. This concludes the staff report.
Now there's a grant, as I understand, it wasn't there in the report.
Yes, there is a grant. The grant is going to cover $441,780 of the purchase.
So we will not spend, I mean, it will, out of our budget, we had budgeted a higher number. So with the grant, it's actually out of pocket, it's going to be less.
Well, I think we
Well-
budgeted a slightly higher number, more than 536, but we knew we were going to get a grant, right?
Right, it's all going to be, all the money that was budgeted is going to be spent. And then the grant is going to come in as revenue for $441,000.
Okay,
But we had 600 and something budget.
it is. It's-
Correct. And then that's what's in the staff report, that other things, they're going to buy other things with it. I mean, that are needed for additional SCBA bottles and so forth. Chief, I don't know if you're still here to elaborate, but there's going to spend it all on SCBA.
Yes, and just to elaborate that extra amount, I think it's 88,000 that was a reference. That's for specialty 1 hour bottles for a BART response and for our RIC packs that are separate from the breathing apparatus, both the SCBA, the harnesses, and the bottles that are carried on the engines, which is the bulk of the purchase. The second part of the purchase under the same amount is for they said specialty bottles that are interoperable with the packs.
This says we're going to spend 536 versus 441, but didn't we have 6 something in the budget? So are we spending the 6 something or the 536?
So the board needs to authorize the 536 because that's going to be the contract with Scott, with the All-Star Fire Equipment. So that's what the board is taking action on. And then the budget includes, there'll be more budget left, $83,000, which then later, at a later time, then the battalion chief will buy more bottles using the remaining budget, but that will not require board approval.
But then still, we will have received, as I understood the way it was, we had 600,000 rounded in the budget. Order $500,000 equipment, and we're only going to have to spend out of that, say $100,000 or less, $100,000 net out of pocket to us. Plus, then we're going to spend 60,000 more on extra bottles or whatever it is, because the grant will cover the major part of the purchase.
Was the grant in our budget? Is the question.
Yes, the grant is in the budget as a revenue.
Okay.
And that, yes.
All right.
So we're going to spend exactly what's in the budget. That sounds like.
That's what I've been told. Yes.
Okay. Go out for public comment.
We do not have any public comment.
I move we approve the whole thing. I'll tell you what agenda item it is. 9.4 as stated.
Second.
Public comment.
We do not have any public comment on the motion.
Do we, sorry. Do we know how long it'll take to get these?
I would be hesitant to guess just based on how long everything else has been taking. There's a great deal of uncertainty about essentially everything that is purchased and shipped that's specialized of late.
So the district is in good shape as far as SCBA's until we get these.
Yeah, the equipment is reaching the end of its service life, but we have enough operating equipment on our frontline units that we're well positioned to be able to safely carry out IDLH firefighting operations until this equipment's received and put in service.
All right.
We have a motion and a second.
Director Danziger.
Aye.
Director Hassler.
Aye.
Director Jorgen.
Aye.
Director Romer.
Aye.
President Jeff.
Aye. Okay, move on to 9.5.
For strike team assignments, the state of California requires the district to adopt a resolution that details which positions are eligible to deploy to incidents and receive portal-to-portal pay. It is necessary to adopt a new resolution at this time because the district added one new position of fire inspector plans examiner, which is eligible to deploy to strike team assignments on a portal-to-portal basis. Staff recommends the board adopt resolution 23-16, which adds the new fire inspector plans examiner position as eligible for portal-to-portal pay when assigned to an emergency incident. This concludes the staff report.
Comment or question?
So I just have a question in general. So this is our plans examiner, right? Somebody comes in and says, hey, I want to build a new house. Here's my plans. Do they meet code? Blah, blah, blah. So I don't know what, training is a great thing in general, but does this person need experience out on the front line for the state fighting fires?
And simple answer is no, sir. But the intent here is that if an opportunity comes up to deploy them specifically on a DINS, a damage inspection team, where they're going after the fire to identify the elements that caused the home to be lost, that's relevant to their role as a plans examiner and as one of our frontline folks who's educating the community on the need for compliance. It's part of our, as we talked about in the earlier item with the map, part of the way that we're attempting to not just say these are the requirements and you have to do them, but part of the way that our folks are able to conduct the outreach and education is to be able to have seen it. And specifically on the DINS inspections, I do believe that makes them a better inspector. That said, it's certainly not their primary job to be deployed, and the ability to deploy on a DINS team is contingent on them being caught up on projects here and able to take that time away from the district to support a broader incident. So for this position, that's not something I would anticipate happening on a regular basis, if at all. That said, having the paperwork in place so that if there was an opportunity to deploy him in that role, we would be able to, seemed like it would be prudent from my perspective.
That was a compelling argument. Thank you.
Sure.
I just have one just editorial question on the resolution itself. The second whereas it is the Moraga-Orinda Fire District's payment to all its employees for time worked. I'm guessing that sentence was supposed to be, it's our policy to pay employees for time worked. I'm just not sure what does that make sense?
Yes, it does.
Okay, yeah, so I just.
So I move that we approve 9.5 as verbally amended by our outside counsel.
Okay, second. Second. Okay, before we proceed, public comment.
So public comment is open. And we do not have any public comment.
Okay,
And we'll take public comment on the motion. We do not have any public comment.
okay,
Director Danziger.
Aye.
Director Hassler.
Aye.
Director Jorgen.
Aye.
Director Romer.
Aye.
President Jeff.
aye. Okay, I think we're done with the agenda and move on down to committee reports, audit committee. No meeting. Any of the other committees?
We did get
Ad hoc?
what's it called? Let me make sure I get the ad hoc committee developed plan. It doesn't look like English up there, but we're expanding the fire prevention program. Yes, we did have a meeting. And the outcome was, and it's something we're gonna want to put on next month's agenda, are ways to increase the adoption of our fire prevention materials for, home hardening, and also, to actually deploy the money that we have budgeted for fire prevention efforts. And these could include things like, so we want to discuss these items at the next agenda. Putting signs out in front of the fire stations or on City of Orinda and City Moraga property, advertising the free gutter guards and the vents screens that we have from MOFD. advertising in newspapers and on Facebook. I mean, the idea is to actually get this stuff deployed. We want to have people harden their homes. We want to have, we have a container full of this stuff, 2 containers full of this stuff. We want to actually get it deployed so that it can do some good. I don't know, depending on the demand, I think we have already spent some money this summer hiring outside crews to man our chipper, as I understand it. So the idea of having, as needed, the ability to have full-time chipper services, if we need some funding for that, this is a source we could use for that. I'm proposing we could use this as a source. Also for maintenance of our fuel breaks. I know we've already been doing some burning, but there's a lot of the fuel break that has not been maintained at all, as far as I know. So we could talk about the idea of using some of this money for maintaining not only the Northern fuel break, but we have a number of other fuel break activities that we've done in the past. And also the idea that there are fire roads out in some of those fire breaks, for example, that have currently are overgrown, have fallen trees on them, are not being, fully maintained. Some of them, I mean, a lot of our fire roads, I'm sure, are great, but not all of them. And so that's another place we might want to, spend some of that money to make sure we have great fire roads out in the community. And then lastly, I think the idea that at the moment we had, in the past, we had a grant and our 12.5% overhead fee was sent back into the general fund. I realize we can't necessarily I think there are restrictions on whether we can pre-allocate that particular money, but it doesn't mean we can't allocate money that looks a lot like that money at roughly the same time. And I would propose that we discuss putting that into a special trust that could be used to maintain the fire breaks that we have into the future. Because, as I understand it, we spend, a vast majority of the money with the fire break, and then there isn't any money available in the future to maintain it, even though it would only cost a small percentage of the initial amount to keep them doing as much good as they are. The brush you remove, can be weed whacked, a couple of years later, rather than having to be, taken out with a chainsaw, that sort of thing. So those are some of the ideas that we would like to discuss at the next board meeting.
So that you're requesting that on to be on.
I'm going to put that. I'm going to send these in, and we can put those items on the agenda.
Okay. 10.3.
I don't think
Nothing.
we'd have anything.
Okay, 10.4.
We did have a meeting with on Monday. Monday,
2 days ago.
Yeah, 2 days ago. Monday with the city of Orinda, and it was a good sharing of information. They have upgraded they have lowered the requirements for being able to participate in their grant program. For example, it used to be more restrictive than it is now. And the participation, I think they used to have literally a couple of people that had applied. And now in the last month, I think they're up to 12 or 14 people that have applied. And almost all of those have been approved. So I think it's finally catching a hold. And I'm fairly sure that there is also a relationship to our enforcement efforts. People realize they have stuff they have to do, and here's a free source of money. And I think we've been actually communicating the availability of these funds as we're doing some of the enforcement. So I think, as the carrot and the stick is actually working. And they are looking forward to, there are some emergency drills. One's happening on September 16th. Okay. And where is that? Forgot which geography that is. But it's one of these, it's a virtual evacuation, I believe, that we're doing.
Where is it going to be?
I'm trying to think which area it is. I don't know what they said, actually.
It's a virtual evacuation of the entire community plus Lafayette. The day may be getting moved based on feedback received after the 2x2 committee about that particular day falling on a religious holiday that would preclude some members of our community from participating. So we're working with stakeholders about an alternate day that would be less impactful.
Okay. So I think it was just generally a good sharing of, the progress we're making. There were questions about Lahaina and, are our systems current? So I think, and some of those things, we've talked about tonight. So again, a good sharing. I think the next meeting is going to be sometime in October, November. Yeah. But I think it's a good way to get the people, especially the board members and the city manager in Orinda, up to speed on what MOFD is doing. I think we're probably already fairly aware of what they're doing, but it's been a good education process, if nothing else. There are some new board members, and I think it's been very productive.
Okay,
Shall we open public comment on the committee reports? We have no public comment?
okay,
Oh, I'm
Keith?
sorry. Did you want to?
I was
Please.
going to, yeah. That's great.
Come on, you sat here for 2 hours.
Hi, my name's James Duff, resident of Moraga, employee of the city of Orinda. And just in terms of when y'all, apologies for y'all and y'all, had mentioned the need to maintain the shaded fuel breaks. In my previous employment years ago, I had worked for the Conservation Corps, and currently there is in Marin the Fire Foundry program, somewhat similar to Crew 12, but instead of just being firefighters learning how to do wildland work, it is young adults from, I believe, economically disadvantaged homes that are being trained on how to do wildland work. So I believe that they do fee for service work as well. So it would be potentially, to my knowledge, something that might be contractable.
Great, thank you.
Yep.
thank you. Okay. Any items on the agenda or request on the agenda for next month?
So the one we just talked about, and then
Yeah.
from the committee report, but also turn of what it was early in the meeting, we talked about adding something to the agenda. One of the early items, what was it?
I had inquired of the fire marshal about, and specifically it's in the 2016 Standards of Cover report. There's a pie chart that breaks down by incident. And I think 4% of our responses are to fires, something like 3% are to hazards. And the fact that there was a huge portion of that pie chart, 23% was false alarms and others. And that kind of jumped out at me in view of previous discussions that we had had with regard to the multiple. I think the remark was 4 times a day, a fire engine or ambulance is sent out to St. Mary's College because of a false alarm. So my question would be, is that 23% figures relatively, was that an outlier for 2015? Is that some pattern that we've had between 2010 and today's date? How does that compare with other fire districts? Is it about in line with other fire districts? And if it's totally out of line, is that because St. Mary's has been a problem for 8 years? And we kind of need to prioritize that, whether that's formally through our standards of cover going forward. I mean, I hate to have a bunch of benchmarks, given our topography and the unique terrain and the challenges that we have. I don't like to impose upon our firefighters an expectation that they arrive in 5 minutes as opposed to 5 minutes and 10 seconds, because every time they're called out, there's some risk to the firefighters, to bicyclists. But there is I think, I don't recall whether it was Director Danziger or myself that brought out that every time those fire equipment gets sent out on a false alarm, there's increased costs of maintenance. There's gasoline that's burned, there are costs maintained. So I think that's something that would be worthwhile,
Well,
either informally or by putting it on an agenda and having you guys the opportunity to.
if you remember on the report of fines, there's a huge number of unpaid fines that have been levied but not collected
That's correct, and that would be
from
in
St. Mary's.
thousands of dollars of unpaid fines that have been assessed against St. Mary's and have not been paid.
what's the right, has there been any real sit down discussions, or should there be? Whether it's from the board level or management level with St. Mary's and say, this is intolerable.
I would defer to council on that, as he's had the latest discussion with council they've retained for this issue.
Yeah, I have just by a coincidence, an old person, but he's not old, person I worked with in the past. Has been retained by St. Mary's, a lawyer, very, very good lawyer, who reached out to me about the situation, in quotes. We were actually able to make a little bit of progress, which was a couple of, well, their permits are held up because they haven't been paying their fines. We were able to agree to move, actually the chief agreed and Jeff agreed to move, to approve 2 of those permits that they were requesting, because they were for work, as I understand it, I don't know the exact work, but related to repairing or fixing or improving their fire alarm systems. So we were able to move 2 of those on the theory that even though our normal policy would be to hold up permits, obviously we don't want to hold up permits that are
The solution.
right, designed to solve the problem. So we did move ahead with those. I imagine that they're going to be approaching us, or maybe we can approach them about the status of the fines themselves. I recognize that they're going to take the view that they're contested in a variety of ways, et cetera. However, they haven't contested them at the board, so they're not appealed. You will recall they had the one that was appealed. I think there are further conversations, to be had. It's a little bit of a delicate situation because, it is not our kin to tell them to spend a bunch of money to get new alarm systems, but on the other hand, it is our kin to charge them for alarms. And as has been pointed out by the board, there's a real cost and risk
There is.
responding to, and it goes even beyond what you said, because the risk is at some point people stop answering quickly because they don't really believe it's real, and then the next day something really bad happens. So this is a very significant problem. I do think there is a perception, I certainly think erroneous on their part, that the district, our district, is in dire financial straits, and that we need this fine revenue in order to run the So I mean, I'm telling you this.
Well, the fine covers the cost of servicing an egregious user.
No, I've made this point, of course, that is not the case. So there appears to be a real misunderstanding, I think, between the parties about this problem and how we resolve it. So,
And of course, the biggest problem is if you're responding to a false alarm and there's a real alarm, you're going to be more delayed going to that one.
right, exactly.
So, I mean, it could be a serious problem.
That's the issue.
Yeah. So I think I may have made some progress by pointing out the district is economically self-sufficient and is well managed, and that this is not the way the district. We'd be happy to forego any revenue at all for fines if people would comply. So that's where we are right now. I think we'll have some more conversations, I imagine, in the next week or two. But as I say, we did make a little bit of forward progress by Freeman.
And if it helps at all, please convey my concerns that I wonder how long this has been going on, how long it's continuing to go on. And from my standpoint, the fines are a relatively minor issue. It's the safety of our citizens on the road that are in danger from some accident. Somebody, some elderly person pulls in front of a fire truck and we have a disaster 4 times a day. There's a risk to the students. There's a risk to the administrators and the faculty out there. There's a responsibility that the board and the president have to the entire community. It goes far, far beyond the fines.
And I would say also, although the chief is probably not going to say this, that he had approached St. Mary's about meeting with this relatively new president at St. Mary's. And was told, well, I now know, based on the advice of their counsel, that he didn't want to meet just yet. So Chief has reached out to them. It's a genuine, I think, truly a misunderstanding of the intent of the district here. And of the depth of our concern on the contrary, on the other side of the coin, for the severity of the problem.
It seems to me, I mean, as long as I've been on the board, this has been an issue.
Is it really?
It's a long term.
Oh, yeah, it's-
No kidding.
So it's,
That's outrageous. I'm outraged by that. You know, what was it? We spent $60,000 on gas in this event. That's an unnecessary expense. There are emissions that come out of those vehicles every time a trip is made. There's some risk for the firefighters on every trip.
So maybe in terms of the item you're proposing for next time, because that was how this arose. Maybe the question is broadly a report on false, it's not just false alarms, I forget the correct term.
Well, it's false alarms
Yeah.
and other.
Others.
So the other thing, I needed more information. What's other?
Right.
You know, maybe
It's-
firefighters can tell me that.
If I may, false alarms is being used imprecisely here. A false alarm is an alarm that was pulled with malintent. But there are a few of those at St. Mary's. The majority of calls at St. Mary's are nuisance alarms, which have to do with a malfunctioning system.
So that's a different slice of the pie chart.
Either a malfunction system or the popcorn burned and they didn't have the right kind of smoke detector. So, or heat detector, whatever, the
Yeah.
sensor. And so it sends off a fire, a call versus not.
But those 23%, those are situations in which the fire personnel have to get to the scene before they realize that it's a false alarm or other, right? So they have driven it.
Yes, so there's some nuance there with St. Mary's in that this has been a feature of the district far preceding my time here. Talking to folks who've been on the job 20 years, this has always been a feature of the district. Over time, some habits that are less than ideal have developed, such as units have gotten into the habit of canceling en route when contacted by St. Mary's staff who informed them that the fire was out. You may recall from the item that we issued the citation for, where in this case, our crews arrived and were informed by the St. Mary's safety staff that the building where there had in fact been a fire had been evacuated. Several hours into the event, they determined that there was a student passed out in the room who was inebriated, who they had missed. So there are elements that when it comes to the clearing of an alarm and determining that there is not a fire, that is a fire district responsibility. And as I said, some of the habits over time had degraded, so that folks were taking a radio report from a person other than a fire district member on scene saying this is either a false or nuisance alarm, you can cancel. That said, we were always responding, and after that came to light as part of this process, the crews are continuing in to confirm, as is our responsibility to confirm, that it is in fact a false or nuisance alarm.
So one issue to find a point on that the St. Mary's people say is, well, we call you after you've been dispatched, or before you've been dispatched to say this is a false alarm. And the concern the chief's expressing is the problem is
Once you're out the door, you gotta go all the way.
Can't necessarily trust that information is
Yeah.
correct. So
Right.
we would have issues.
Right, if we didn't show up and there really was a fire, it'd be a big problem.
Exactly.
So that's the challenge.
So back to agenda items. So Marcia, would it be a huge imposition, since somebody's gonna write the notes anyway, to someplace in the first 20 minutes of the meetings, somebody said, that'll be on next time's agenda, and I don't remember what the thing was. So if we could somehow go back and look, or listen to the tape or whatever, and then put that on the agenda, that'd be great.
It was the discussion about the alarm, sir. Was
Oh,
the-
is it? Okay, great, well then we got it.
hey, you have a motion for adjournment.
I move we adjourn.
So you do need to take public comment on any future agenda items? We do not have any public comment. So there was a motion to adjourn?
Steve had a
Second.
comment.
Who, I'm sorry, who motioned?
Romer seconded Jordan's motion.
Time is 9:19. All
I
those
just
in
have
favor?
I have a comment on the motion.
Okay.
I would just like to adjourn this meeting in memory of all those that perished in the fire in Lahaina, as well as sending our thoughts to the people that survived and the first responders that are there.
I want to weigh in on that too. I appreciate you doing that. It occurred to me earlier in the week that we ought to have a moment of silence. And just getting back to the 2x2 meeting. We raised several issues about Lahaina, but I think we're also cognizant that we still don't know what the body count is. And there ought to be some deference to letting this process. We need to find out exactly what happened before we jump on the bandwagon to start learning lessons. It's a delicate balance, but I appreciate Director Danziger's having pointed that out because I think that's totally appropriate. And it really informs so much of it.
Okay.
All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you.
Good job, Tom. Record time. All right.
Yeah. 9:30.